Vietnam. After World War II, France, then America, become mired in the century's longest war. The pivotal event is one of the bloodiest and most historic battles of the 20th century, Dien Bien Phu. After the ruin of World War II, the European powers seek to regain their former colonies. Indochina is the most prized French possession, comprising Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. But the war in Asia continues. Indochina is still occupied by the Japanese, and France faces another obstacle. Its ally, America, opposes colonialism. France had previously ruled Vietnam for 80 years, exploiting the rubber and rice economy and the cheap labor. Vietnam's peasants had repeatedly rebelled. Colonial conditions are described by Hanoi diplomat Ha Van Lao.
Comme tous les jeunes Vietnamiens en ce moment,
like all the young Vietnamese at that time, under the domination of the French colonialists, we felt that our liberty was gone. We felt that we were no longer independent. In colonialist days, from a political point of view, the word patriot was a synonym for criminal, and patriots were treated as such. That is to say, prison. There were more prisons than schools. Independence and liberty were empty words.
One punishment for insurrection, public execution. But the Vietnamese nationalist movement grows under the charismatic leadership of Ho Chi Minh. Ho recognizes that Japan's impending defeat is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to end colonialism. He sees America as his best means of achieving independence. After 32 years in exile, he returns to organize resistance. Born in central Vietnam, Ho is now 54. Both of his parents had been active nationalists. Ho had spent his exiled youth studying the Marxist Revolution. In December 1944, Ho and other guerrilla leaders form a so-called Workers' Party, known as the Viet Minh. Its military strategist is a former history teacher called Bo Nguyen Giap. Giap and Ho offer to aid the U.S. against the Japanese. America begins its Vietnam involvement by supporting Ho. It provides small arms for behind-the-lines resistance. The time, April 1945. Exactly 30 years before the Vietnam War would end. Maintaining a gentle image, Ho is then seen by American contacts as more nationalist than communist. Major Archimedes Patty heads the first U.S. intelligence mission in Vietnam, sent by the OSS, the CIA's predecessor. 50 American agents help train the guerrillas, and at times fight alongside of them. Recalls Patty.
It was combat. It was a very small operation as far as a war is concerned, but nevertheless, it is true that they did work with the Viet Minh against the Japanese. Then later, Giap and his Viet Minh crew went out to attack several Japanese outposts with our men after they had been trained by the Americans in the use of grenade launchers and flamethrowers and rifles, machine guns, BARs and so on.
In August 1945, the Japanese surrender, and Ho's guerrilla forces seize power, occupying Hanoi. On September 2nd, Ho Chi Minh declares independence. The middle class and Vietnam's Catholics are apprehensive, but nationalists and communists are overjoyed. Ho becomes his country's first president. A public celebration in Hanoi's Ba Dinh Square is recalled by American agent Archimedes Patty.
It was a very touching ceremony. I could tell from the reaction from the crowd, and the crowd was fantastic. Ho was very anxious for recognition. He actually always kept harping on the point, why don't the United States give us moral support? We don't want anything else from them. Nothing but moral support.
But America steps aside. The U.S. needs its European allies in the developing struggle against communism. The French reoccupy Vietnam. Colonialism returns. With no more American help, Ho Chi Minh first advocates cooperation with the French. Their response is to make Vietnam semi-autonomous. In 1946, Ho travels to France to negotiate, but finds no real political independence. Back in Hanoi, Ho tells his compatriots the terms are unacceptable. November 1946, the war begins. There are 3 years of sporadic, inconclusive fighting. To the rest of the world, it is an obscure Asian conflict. But in December 1949, Mao Zedong's communist victory in China, followed by the Korean War, shocks America. The U.S. now arms the French in Indochina, and Mao provides modern weapons for the Viet Minh. Another 3 years pass, with Vietnam as an escalating East-West war. In 1952, the Communist Viet Minh Army takes over the strategic valley of Dien Bien Phu. The valley dominates supply routes linking Vietnam, Laos, and China. The French commander, General Henri Navarre, decides to occupy Dien Bien Phu in a daring parachute assault.
The purpose of Dien Bien Phu was to defend Laos, and I decided on the Dien Bien Phu entrenched camp because with the state of my forces, which I said were inferior to those of the Viet Minh in terms of mobile forces, the strategy of blocking the road from Laos to Dien Bien Phu was the only one which seemed to be reasonable, and I am still certain that it was the only one.
General Giap's second phase assault on March 30th concentrates on the strong points which protect the French command center. Two important outposts are overrun. The French push hard and retake them, but lose 2,000 men in 5 days. The Viet Minh enlarged the attacks, capturing strongpoint Elien to the east. The French again counterattack.
We started shooting, and we fired maybe 3,000 or 4,000 shots. And all the cannons of Dien Bien Phu, all the 120 mortars, were aimed at one position. All of a sudden, when the artillery had finished, the Air Force was there once more, and my men got out of the trenches and went to the attack. But the Viet Minh were also entrenched. Maybe half of them had been killed, but there still remained the other half, and they fought like the great soldiers that they are. They fought man to man with daggers. After one whole day, we had recaptured Elien 1. So my men had to go back into the trenches. But they were digging upon fallen bodies. The soil was covered with dead bodies, French and Viet Minh. The smell was horrible.
The terrible bloodshed now lowers Viet Minh morale. They have only one doctor for 50,000 men. General Giap admits to what he calls negative thoughts affecting troop performance. More frontal assaults risk destroying the Communist army. Giap decides on a radical change of tactics, underground war. He uses tens of thousands of troops and civilians to dig a 100-mile network of trenches. Soon, the 6-foot deep trenches reach like tentacles around the low hills in the valley's center. When the trench lines are complete, Giap resumes the offensive. Now his troops are almost face to face with the French. France now urgently seeks U.S. intervention. America is already paying 80% of the war bill, providing giant Globemaster transports to airlift French reinforcements. The French request and get more American arms and fighter planes. But the U.S. wants its major allies to join the aid airlift. Britain refuses, fearing such intervention would escalate the East-West Cold War. America hesitates. As the hours of argument tick by, the Viet Minh guns decimate the Dien Phu. It becomes so bad the French cannot even bury their dead. Colonel Bijard.
All the able battalions had come, all the battalions. I kept telling my men, we must find a formula. We must hold on one more day. The Americans will not let us down. They may come. We felt we needed a day, an extra day. That is why we saw this thing through.
Supplies are dwindling. By late April, the French control only a fraction of the valley center. Almost a third of the French force has been wiped out. The fate of the remaining 10,000 depends on getting ammunition and food, but pilots and troops are helpless as more and more supplies float into communist territory. The Viet Minh trench lines are now just 300 yards from the French command bunker. Even the seriously wounded attempt to fight on.
So some got up, one who had lost an eye, one who had lost an arm. One arm, we called him, said, "We're going back." We saw boys arriving who had lost an arm or an eye, and they were still asking for a weapon to continue fighting. It's indeed remarkable. There was a great spirit. When we went into that shelter where those men were, there was a foul smell, and we could see maggots on legs. And Grovin left them on because he said, "I think it prevents gangrene." So those maggots were moving around on the patient's legs, and it was terrible. So around May 6th, we went to see the men with Langlais, and everyone was exhausted, completely exhausted. We knew we could go no further. There was no more ammunition, and the men could not take it anymore. So when the Viet Minh attacked on May 7th, it was really the end.
The end is an anticlimax, resistance futile. The Viet Minh rushed the French command post, where senior officers have been waiting to surrender. Among them, Colonel Langlais.
We heard something rolling over the roof. I was seated in my chair, not thinking of anything in particular. The stairs leading to the outside were in front of me, and we could see a patch of sky there. We all thought, a grenade. God, a grenade would be thrown down the stairs and explode. But that wasn't the case. We saw a victorious Viet soldier in a cork helmet, wearing a gas mask and carrying a bayonet, his gun, who said only, "Get out."
1730 hours, May 7th. Finally, the Valley Arena is silent. The Viet Minh victory has cost them an estimated 8,000 dead in the 55-day battle. But French Indochina is finished. On both sides, history records the battle as extraordinarily heroic, the aftermath less so. The French are obliged to parade in mass surrender for the communist cameras. 10,000 prisoners start a march into captivity, which only 1 in 2 survive. Colonel Bijard.
Apart from the casualties of Dien Bien Phu, more than half of the survivors of Dien Bien Phu died in captivity. Worn out and abandoned, they lay on the roadside, and we were forbidden to help them. The Viet Minh would leave them to their fate, feeding them a handful of uncooked rice. What could they do? The poor fellows died along the roadside.
They marched for up to 60 days to the Red River prison camps 500 miles away. The Viet Minh are without doctors. Those who weaken die where they fall. The Geneva Conference in Indochina begins as Dien Bien Phu falls. Britain, France, Russia, and China sign the accords, but America does not. The agreement partitions Vietnam at the 17th parallel. This border remains for 20 years.